Welcome back to episode 7 of Hike and Spike, the podcast that stops the clock and gives you coverage on the latest NFL news, games, and trends. Today, we'll be talking about the second to last week of NFL. First, we're going to start with an initial take where we discuss games this week and trends we've seen this season. Andy?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to start with a thriller of a game that just happened, which was the game between the Dolphins and the Raiders. It definitely had playoff implications. The Raiders needed to win in order to keep their hopes alive. And the Dolphins, they didn't really need to win, but it definitely helped them improve their chances of making the playoffs. So basically, the first three quarters weren't like crazy or anything. It was just like back and forth, some field goals. Both teams had a touchdown. But Tua Tagovailoa got injured during the middle of the third quarter around, and the third quarter ended up with the Raiders having a lead of 16-13. But then in the fourth quarter, with only 4 minutes left, the Jason Sanders, who's the kicker for the Dolphins, tied it up at 16 all. And I kind of just thought, maybe that's probably going to be the end of like regular time. It's just going to go to overtime. But somehow four more scores occurred during those last 4 minutes. So basically, in like 30 seconds from then, Derek Carr launched like an 85-yard bomb to Nelson Aguilar. Well, he didn't like throw it 85 yards, but like Nelson Aguilar got an 85-yard touchdown. But the interesting thing was Daniel Carlson actually missed the extra point, which opened the door for the Dolphins to take the lead. That's what happened. Miles Gaskin had a very, very good like catch and run touchdown for 59 yards, and Jason Sanders made the extra point, making it 23-22 with about 3 minutes left. But then later, Derek Carr threw a long ball that was incomplete, but there was a big defensive pass interference penalty on it, and it brought them into the red zone. They were able to almost run out the clock completely. But on third and goal from about the 1 yard line, they made an absolutely terrible decision, in my opinion. They should have at least tried to run and make it a like 5 or 6 point game that would force the Dolphins to score a touchdown in order to win. But instead, they just kneeled the ball, very conservative, and I think a very weak decision. So they ended up just taking the field goal, getting a 2 point lead. And with about 10 seconds left in the game, while he was being dragged down by the face mask, Ryan Fitzpatrick or Fitzmagic threw like a 39-yard ball that was caught like while he wasn't even like looking where he was throwing, which was really impressive. And the face mask added an extra 15 yards to the end of the play, which brought the Dolphins into field goal range. And with 1 second left, Jason Sanders made the game-winning field goal. So really great game. And the Raiders were eliminated from the playoffs. Now it looks like the Dolphins, who were supposed to be just like in a rebuilding phase this year, it looks like they're actually going to make the playoffs. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was a really cool game. And I think if the Raiders won, it would be like last year, right, when they had to have about 10 different things go right in order for them to make the playoffs, and it didn't work out. I think the first one, which actually didn't happen, was the Patriots losing to the Dolphins in the last week of the season, which was super funny because last year's Dolphins were pretty bad. So, one thing which I would like to talk about is just how successful rookie quarterbacks are statistically and how they've been this year. This year, we saw a lot of rookie quarterbacks taken initially in the first 6 picks, 3 of them, and then we saw a variety of them taken way later in later rounds. We've seen in previous years people like Drew Lock, Gardner Minshew, and others get playing time and become starters for teams because they were quarterbacks drafted in later rounds. But this year, there's only been one quarterback who has been activated who has not been in the first round. So the three who started this in the first round, one of them started in week 1, and 2 others had to wait a few games. So what we saw is that rookie quarterbacks this year, while they admittedly off the start didn't struggle, they eventually got caught up by other teams' defenses. So we saw stuff like Tua Tagovailoa winning his first like 4 games, and we saw Justin Herbert posting amazing stats in the first 5 weeks of the season, but eventually it caught up to them. So we're seeing nowadays things like Ryan Fitzpatrick having to save to on several occasions, Justin Herbert and the Chargers going having only 5 or 6 wins, and you see Jalen Hurts, the newest member of the quarterbacks who are starting, uh, throw for 2 interceptions and a fumble in the most recent week. So it's a bit opposite to the normal narrative where rookie quarterbacks normally struggle and then grow into it and become really good later on. Hopefully these quarterbacks can become really great over the next few years, and I'm wishing the best of success to all of them.
That was a very unique distinction, but personally, I have Justin Herbert going for Rookie of the Year. A lot of people have Justin Jefferson, but I feel like quarterbacks should get more credit because, wide receivers can help you win, but you need a really good quarterback in order to do that. So, anyways, my initial take is going to be about Alvin Kamara's 6 touchdown performance on Christmas Day versus the Vikings. So, as we all know, 6 touchdowns is a very unique thing, and it does not happen very often. But Alvin Kamara recently did it, and he scored 6 touchdowns, which means that he would tie a previous record, which was set by another Bears running back who recently passed away, whose name is Gale Sayers. And it's a very historic occurrence since usually things don't happen like that. And also, let alone teams don't score 50 points. So it was a very interesting game. Overall score was about 30-50. The Vikings will probably be knocked out of the playoffs with the Cardinals and the Bears and the Rams fighting for the last wild card spot. But the Saints were able to secure a spot as the divisional leader. So it's definitely going to be an interesting ride to see who ends up on top in that wild card position. But I can tell that Bears fans, Cardinals fans, and Rams fans were happy about the win.
Yeah, that was an incredible performance from him. And I actually had him on my fantasy team, which was pretty nice. He got like 56 points, helped me do a 200-point performance. But I wasn't in the championship, so it didn't matter. But anyway, let's move on to the next segment, which is trivia.
That's right, trivia. This is episode 7. As you may or may not remember, we are going to have 10 of these before the loser, the person who is in third place, is forced to do a forfeit, and the other 2 get to decide. And maybe you can pitch in the comments below if you have an idea. So currently, I had a really good week last week, and I got up to 50 points, making my deficit only 20. However, I'm the host for this episode, and Andy and Rohan, both of whom have 70, can establish a significant lead. All right, so are you ready for question 1? All right, question 1. What is the longest field goal scored this year? A, 52 yards, B, 59 yards, C, 61 yards, or D, 64 yards? All right, Rohan with the first response.
I'm not really sure. There may have been a 60-yarder that was kicked, but I doubt that it would have been like 63 or 64 since I didn't hear about a new record. So I'm going to go with D. I'm going to go with C.
That's a good guess, but that is incorrect. Andy, what is your guess?
Yeah, I don't think there was one over 60 yards. I think like towards the beginning of the year, Butker hit like a few 50-yard field goals in one game, but I don't think any of them were like 59. So I'm just gonna guess 52. I'm not really sure though.
Yeah, that is a good intuition, but it's not correct. The correct answer was actually a 59-yarder, which was hit a couple weeks back. That was it wasn't really holistically relevant to the end score, but it was an interesting kick. Next question, still tied. How many Super Bowls have the Patriots been to in the Super Bowl era? A, 6, B, 8, C, 11, or D, 13? And Andy with the first response.
All right, so my thought is that they've won 6, I know that, and then they've lost to the Eagles, so that would be 7. They also lost to the Giants twice, which would be 9. So it has to be at least 9, so I just guessed the next one that's higher than 9, which is 11.
That logic worked. In fact, is 11. And I think almost all of them, I think, have come under Brady, if not all of them. So we move on to question 3. Andy currently has 80, Rohan 70, I have 50. How many teams has Antonio Brown played games for? A, 2, B, 3, C, 4, or D, 7? All right, Andy again first.
Well, he's been on the Steelers, the Raiders, the Patriots, and the Bucks, but I think he didn't actually play any games for the Raiders, so I think it's 3.
That is correct. And Andy is taking quite a commanding lead, 90 points for him right now. As we move on to question 4, hopefully Rohan can make a little bit of a comeback here, or maybe not hopefully for me because I can catch Rohan. But question 4, who was the last non-quarterback to be the first overall pick? A, Jadeveon Clowney, B, Eric Fisher, C, Myles Garrett, or D, Baker Mayfield? And Rohan this time with the first response, very quick.
No, just from pure memorization, I know it's got to be Myles Garrett from the 2017 draft. So Baker Mayfield is a quarterback. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that is correct. Baker Mayfield, although sometimes he doesn't play with the IQ of a quarterback, he is a quarterback. Myles Garrett is the most recent first overall pick. Yes, his IQ might also not be great considering he's got suspended for a few games for swinging his helmet at a backup QB. But yeah, he's been pretty good this season. As we move on to the last question, let's see if Rohan can tie it up right here. Which of these quarterbacks is paid the most during the 2020-2021 season? A, Drew Brees, B, Jimmy Garoppolo, C, Philip Rivers, or D, Matt Ryan? Get the first response from Rohan again. Let's see if he can tie it.
Okay, I know it's not Jimmy G. He signed his contract a decent while ago, and it was about $27 million, if I recall correctly. Philip Rivers was on a 1-year deal, so it's around the same. I know that Matt Ryan signed an extension a couple years ago, maybe like 1 or 2 years, and Drew Brees signed one very recently. So it really could be either of them, but I'm gonna go ahead and guess Drew Brees because I'm pretty sure his was more recent.
Drew Brees is a good guess, but it's unfortunately incorrect. It's not Drew Brees. Andy?
I think that like when a quarterback gets like a shorter contract, it tends to be like more per year. And I think Rivers has a fairly like short contract, like 1 or 2 years or something. So I'm gonna guess Rivers.
That's a good guess, but unfortunately that is also incorrect. His is only 25 million, and only. The correct answer is Matt Ryan of the Atlanta Falcons. Yes, the 4-11 Atlanta Falcons for them. Yeah, so it is Matt Ryan. So where we are at the end of episode 7 in terms of trivia, Andy is in the lead with 90. Rohan is at 80, and I am still in last on the chopping block at 50. Hopefully I'm able to make up the gap soon. And hopefully I don't have to do the forfeit. But we move on to the main segment.
Thanks for that trivia, Aki. But now it's time for our main segment, and we have 3 sections for today. So firstly, we have some playoff scenarios by Andrew. Then we'll go on to power rankings by Aki, and I'll conclude the main segment with the team of the week. So now let's go to Andy for his segment on the playoff scenarios.
Yeah, normally we would have fantasy updates, but the fantasy season is over now. So congratulations if you won, like none of us. And yeah, basically that's it. But let's move on to playoff scenarios now. We'll start with the NFC. I'll do like a few teams at a time, and then we'll go from there. So start with the top 3 teams. And that is the Packers, the Saints, and the Seahawks. No matter what, they are going to be the top 3, but it's just the order that could be like switched around a bit. So the team that's most likely to get the 1 seed is the Packers. They guarantee the 1 seed if they get a win or if the Seahawks lose. Now, they don't actually care if the Saints win or lose because they have the tiebreak against the Saints anyway. So even if the Saints win and the Packers lose, the Packers would still have the 1 seed if the Seahawks also lose. But where the Saints do come in, are important in terms of the Packers, is if the Packers don't get the 1 seed. So if the Packers lose and the Seahawks win, then the Saints will determine whether the Packers get the 2 or the 3. So if the Saints lose, then obviously the Packers will be the 2 seed because they'll have an extra game. But if they win, you might be thinking like, well, the Packers still have the tiebreaker anyway, so they should still be the 2 seed. But you would be wrong, because it would actually be a 3-way tie between the Packers, the Saints, and the Packers, the Saints, and the Seahawks, where the Packers have the tiebreaker against the Saints have the tiebreaker against the Seahawks, and the Seahawks have the tiebreaker against the Packers. Kind of like rock, paper, scissors, I guess, if you want to think of it like that. So what happens in this scenario is that the Packers end up with the 3rd seed. Don't really know how, but that's just how the seeding ends up coming out. But then when you move on to the Saints, in order to get the 1 seed, obviously the Packers would have to lose, and they would have to win. But interestingly, the Seahawks would also have to win in order for them to get the 1 seed. That's because of that weird 3-way tie thing. But if the Seahawks lose, then the Saints would only get the 2nd seed because the Packers would still have the 1st seed. So they're probably going to get the 2nd seed. The only way they would get the 3rd seed is if they lost and the Seahawks won. But I don't really think they're going to lose. So I do think the Saints will end up with the 2 seed. And the Seahawks will probably get the 3 seed. They get it if the Packers and the Saints win, or if they lose. And the only way they get the 1 seed is if they win and both of the other teams lose. So what do you guys think is going to happen between these 3 teams?
I think what's probably going to happen is I think all 3 teams win. I think Packers win, Saints win, Seahawks win, and they stay 1, 2, 3.
I agree with that. I think Packers are going to win, and if the Packers win, then the Bears aren't going to make. Oh, they might make the playoffs depending on if the Cardinals win or not. But yeah, I personally want the Packers to win because I'm supporting the NFC West, even though the 49ers are out.
All right, yeah. So we'll get to the Bears later, actually, but now we'll move on to the NFC East, where 3 teams could make the playoffs, and those are the football team, the Cowboys, and the Giants. Now, the football team has the advantage here. It's completely in their hands. All they need to do is win, and they're playing the Eagles with Jalen Hurts, who's been pretty decent, so that may not actually be that easy. But if they lose, then they miss the playoffs, and one of the Cowboys or Giants will make it, and it'll be whichever of them wins their game, because they are playing against each other. So personally, I think that football team, even though Jalen Hurts has been all right, I think football team will still manage to win and make the playoffs.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts, when he's faced with a real defense, hasn't been too good. I still have no faith in the Eagles' offensive line, especially considering what Carson Wentz had to deal with. I still think Carson Wentz is supremely talented. It's just the offensive line was terrible for him. Jalen Hurts at least a bit mobile, so we'll see how well that goes. I think that the football team has probably around a 75% chance in my mind of winning and making the playoffs. But if it's not, unfortunately, Andy, I do believe that the Cowboys will defeat the Giants, because the Cowboys have been looking somewhat decent in terms of their wide receiver core, and Andy Dalton's back. So yeah, it looks better than the Giants situation.
Now, I may have a little bit of a hot take, but I think that the Cowboys are going to win. The Cowboys recently have had a very good offense against the 49ers, which are actually a pretty good defense, believe it or not. They put up 41 points against the Eagles, which are also a decent defense. They put up 37 points, and it was actually a 20-point win. It was very significant, considering the Eagles' offense with Jalen Hurts being a little bit revived. So that means that the Eagles have to beat the football team. And recently, the football team has been on a losing streak, losing their last 2 games. And Jalen Hurts has stepped in as the Eagles quarterback, who's actually been very good for passing. He threw 2 interceptions. But if Jalen Hurts can play pretty well, then I can see the Eagles beating the football team for sure. And in that case, the Cowboys would take the playoff spot as the leader of the NFC East.
Something very interesting is that with only 1 week left, it is possible that the Giants make the playoffs. It's also possible that they get the 3rd overall pick in the draft. That's just a testament to how trash our division is. But let's move on to the rest of the NFC now. And there's a few teams in contention here. The only team that has confirmed made the playoffs is the Bucks, but they could have a few changes in their seeding. They would clinch the 5th seed and play the NFC East winner, which is definitely something you want to do if they either win or the Rams lose. But if neither of those happen, then they will be the 6th seed. The Rams are probably the 2nd best in this situation. They would get the 5th seed with the situation I discussed before. They would probably get the 6th seed in a lot of scenarios where both they win and the Bucks win. And they would also get the 7th seed if they lost and the Bears lost. However, they could miss the playoffs if they lose and the Bears win. But let's move on to the Bears now. So the Bears would clinch the 6th seed if they managed to win and the Cardinals also won. But they don't actually want the Cardinals to win because a Cardinals loss would guarantee them the 7th seed. So, it's better to have the 7th seed and make the playoffs than have like a 50-50 between the 6th and the 8th. And then finally, the Cardinals, they have the toughest path to the playoffs. They would get the 6th seed with a win and a Bears loss, and get the 7th seed with a win and a Bears win. So basically, they have to win. And they're playing the Rams, which like the Rams are good sometimes, but they also lose to the Jets sometimes. So that's like that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, this is gonna be crazy. I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't think the Bears are gonna win. But who knows? I mean, Mitchell Trubisky has been looking pretty good this past month. Like, I don't think enough people were talking about the Bears after their losing streak. I think they probably have gone like what 3-1, 4-1 since that losing streak. So I think they're doing quite well for themselves, but I still think the Packers have a significant advantage there. And between the Cardinals and the Rams, I think Jared Goff is a maybe because I think he has like a dislocated thumb. So that puts the Rams' playoff hopes not that high. I think it might end up, I'm sorry, not playoffs, the 6th seed. I think Rams probably fall to the 7th seed and Cardinals. Rams and Cardinals make the playoffs. That's my prediction.
And now I also have another hot take. I believe that the Cardinals will make the playoffs, and I think they're going to beat the Rams, which I'll explain in a second. But I also think that the Bears are going to lose because the Packers. And then as for the Bucks, they're facing the Falcons. But there's so many upsets that happen on Week 17, especially with the Falcons. They're just really good at upsetting teams. They upset the 49ers last year. They upset another team last year, whose name I forgot. They almost upset the Chiefs, but they should have. They really deserve that win. And I think they can upset the Bucks again. The Bucks have been sort of inconsistent recently, but they're on a winning streak, so who knows? But as for the Cardinals-Rams situation, I think the Cardinals are going to win because even though the Rams are the expected winner, as I said before, a lot of upsets happen in Week 17 because you never know. It's the end of the season. Even though the Rams are expected to win and they have won the past 5 or 6 occurrences versus the Cardinals under Sean McVay, the Rams, as Aki said, have their quarterback injured. Their starting running back, Darrell Henderson, is doubtful as of right now with the leg injury, which is really bad for the Rams because he's their main running back. But they still have Cam Akers. But the Cardinals are looking pretty good, in my opinion. They did have an ugly game against the 49ers, but Kyler Murray, he did not sustain an injury. It was just a small scare. And I think the Cardinals offense will be able to, and their defense, they'll be able to secure a win.
Yeah, something interesting is that with some teams a quarterback injury is manageable because like with the Cowboys you have Andy Dalton who's fine, but with the Rams you have the worst backup quarterback in the league in John Wolford. He's terrible, so that would definitely be a huge blow to them. But let's move on to the AFC now, and the first seed is fairly easy. The Chiefs have it no matter what because they're just very good. They're 2 games ahead of anyone else, so there's no way anyone can catch them. Then the next is going to be between the Bills and the Steelers. Both have clinched their divisions, but are playing for that second and third seed, which really isn't actually that important because neither of them would get a first round bye. But basically, the Bills, all they need is a win or a Steelers loss, whereas the Steelers would need a win and a Bills loss because the Bills do have that tiebreaker against them. I think that Bills they may bench Josh Allen for the game, but like I don't really think it. I don't really know if either team's going to try that hard in their upcoming game. So I think the Bills will maybe still win, I guess, and keep the second seed.
Yeah. I think that no matter what happens, it doesn't affect too much. So I think probably Bills end up the second seed. It really depends on what happens down below, and I'm not sure when the games are, but if it's like Sunday night or Monday night for one of those teams, then they might look at the games which happened earlier. This might be completely irrelevant depending on the timing of those games. But let's say the Dolphins fall to the 7th seed or something. Then if that Dolphins is probably a preferred matchup for these teams, so they'd want to make it to this. They'd want to win, get to the 2nd seed to face the Dolphins. But if the Ravens are the 7th seed, they might want to lose, and if the other team wins, to drop to the 3rd seed to face a team like the Browns or something.
And I also have a pretty standard situation, no hot takes. This time for me, I believe the Bills are going to secure the number 2 seed because they either have one situation or another situation. Only one of them has to happen. But as for the Steelers need the Bills to lose and they need to win. And in both games, the Steelers and the Bills respectively are expected to win. And I think that's what's going to happen. So that's why I have the Bills.
Right? But now we have the absolute mess, which is the 4th through 7th seeds. The 4th through 7th seed, and this is because everyone is tied. Like there are 5 teams that are 10-5. Like that's just absolutely ridiculous. The first thing to note, however, is that 2 of them, the Colts and the Titans, are fighting for the 4th seed because they're both in the only division that doesn't have a confirmed winner yet. So basically, the Titans have the tiebreaker against the Colts. So the Titans would need a win or a Colts loss, whereas the Colts would need a win and a Titans loss. So like very similar situation with the Steelers and the Bills. But apart from that, it's basically a free for all pretty much. But the main thing to note is which teams have tiebreakers against other teams. So basically, the ranking in terms of tiebreaker is Titans at the top, and then the Dolphins, and then the Ravens, and then the Browns, and then finally the Colts. So if you saw if multiple of those teams won, then they would be ranked in that order. And if multiple of them lost, they'd be ranked in that order. But obviously, if like the Colts won and the Titans lost, the Colts would still be ahead of them. But basically, what we're most likely going to see is that the Titans will keep the 4th seed, in my opinion, and then the 5th through 7th will be some combination of probably the Dolphins, the Ravens, and the Browns, depending on who wins and loses. But basically, if they all win, it would be Dolphins at 5, Ravens at 6, and then Browns at 7.
Yeah, I'm not gonna go into specifics too much. I think it's really all up for grabs. I think it's gonna come down. Wait, who are the Colts facing? The Colts. If the Colts, the Colts are facing the Jags. So I think the Colts will, even though they aren't in the playoffs right now, you might think they have the lowest chance of making the playoffs because they're last in the tiebreaker. I think they're almost a guarantee to make it into the playoffs because the Dolphins and the Browns are facing the Bills and Steelers, respectively. And I think that there's almost a guarantee that one of them will probably lose. Because both of those teams their opponents are facing are really talented. And if one of them loses, and I think the Colts are facing the Jags, so the Colts win, they're definitely making the playoffs. I think it's going to come down to Dolphins or Browns. Whoever loses is out. It'd be sad because there will be a 10-6 team which doesn't make the playoffs, whereas there will be a 6-10 or 7-9 team which does. You can thank the NFC East for that, but it's going to be really fun to see how Week 17 rolls out.
I completely agree with what both of you said. There's a lot of chaos in this division, and not this in this conference, and it's unfortunate to see a 6-10 team, or 7-9 team taking the spot of a 10-6 team that deserves to be in the playoffs, but cannot be because of their standing in their division. So I have the Colts winning the division over the Titans, and the Colts get an automatic win because they're facing the Jaguars. Even if the Jaguars wanted to, they're not going to win because, first of all, their star running back is injured. Second of all, they want to tank to get Trevor Lawrence. And third of all, they're the Jaguars. So that's already out the window. But as for the Titans game and Texans game, that's the game that really determines this. The last game, which was in October, was actually a shootout. It was 36-42, and the Titans ended up winning. And it actually went all the way to overtime. It was just completely absurd performances on offense. And as I said before, Week 17 is where a lot of upsets happen. And I see the Texans getting another upset because they're a decent team. They have Deshaun Watson. They have a decent receiving core. Their defense is okay. And they have the potential, and I see them as a team similar to the Atlanta Falcons. They can win, but things just aren't clicking. So I think they're going to beat the Titans, and the Colts are going to get the win, which is going to propel the Colts forward. I have no idea what's going to happen for the other teams, but it's going to be interesting. I'll just say that.
Yeah, really the problem with the Texans, though, is even though they are somewhat talented, they don't really have anything to play for. So that's why I think the Titans will still manage to win that game. But just to clarify, I'll just go through all the teams quickly. I won't go through every single seed, but I'll just go through the condition that they need to make the playoffs at all. So for the Titans, that would be they either need to win or they just need one of the Colts, Dolphins, Ravens, or Browns to lose. That looks very likely for the Titans. The Colts, they would need a win and one of the Titans, Dolphins, Ravens, and Browns to lose. The Dolphins would need a win or one of the Colts, Ravens, or Browns to lose. That's fairly likely, I think. Even if they do lose, one of those things would very likely happen. And then the Ravens would need a win or one of the Colts and Browns to lose. Less likely, they only have two teams rather than three teams like the Dolphins. And then finally, the Browns, they would need a win or the Colts to lose. So, they only have one team that they can have lose if they don't win their game. So that's basically how the playoff picture looks right now. Very, very complicated. It's going to be an exciting finish to the regular season, especially with this new 17 format.
Yeah, I'm sure the Browns are really wishing that they didn't have all their wide receivers on the infamous list for last game. And I think in both conferences, Jets wins are impacting seeding tremendously. All right, so that was a really interesting segment. Hopefully we're going to get this out quickly early in this week so you can see before Thursday Night Football and definitely before Sunday how the scenarios may play out. And next week we'll be talking about how the scenario actually did play out. I think I'm really excited for the AFC and the NFC too. I'd be shocked if the Bears make it. That's for sure. All right, so next we're going to be going through power rankings. It's going to be a much shorter segment. I'll start with I'll start with 10 through 6. So at number 10, I have the Cleveland Browns. At number 9, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At 8, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers. At 7, I have the Baltimore Ravens. At 6, I have the Tennessee Titans. So what's your opinions on that? I'll just say a couple of things. So the Steelers are low because they haven't looked good the past 3 weeks. They've been looked good for basically 1.5 quarters out of the last 16 quarters that they played. And I'm not willing to make a judgment based on that 1.5 quarters yet. I think that they probably are a first round exit team. So they are low. I have the Ravens relatively high because they are peaking at the right time. Everyone's healthy. Lamar Jackson's playing like an MVP again. And their running game is, they have a nice trifecta. Even though Mark Ingram is out, they still have amazing running backs. So I think that they should be a bit high. A couple of exceptions which I didn't put. I didn't put the Colts because they choked last week to the Steelers, and I guess there's an argument that the Colts could slip in at 10. The Rams I didn't put because they have not looked good, and Jared Goff has dislocated thumb. And the Dolphins, I think they need to figure out their quarterback mess, and I don't think that they have an it factor which can take them over the top in a playoff game.
Yeah, I think basically the only disagreement I'd have here is actually the Bucks placement. I'd have them maybe a little higher, maybe 7, maybe even 6 actually, because I think just like really the main problem that they've faced so far has been their inability to perform in the first half. And we saw when they came up against the Lions, Tom Brady performed excellently in the first half. Obviously, it's the Lions, so like it's not that impressive. But just being able to see that they can perform before the third quarter is really important. And I think that basically they have an amazing team. Like it wants to get that problem fixed. The receiving core is one of the best in the league with Mike Evans and Gronk and Godwin. Their defense has even been very excellent this year with like JPP, Levante David, etc. So I think that the Bucks are definitely a strong contender for the Super Bowl.
I agree with Andy here. I like your rankings a lot, actually, except for the Bucks placement. I would probably put them at least 1 or 2 spots higher for the same reason. The Bucks, even though statistically they have been losing games recently, if you look closer, these games have been really close against the Rams and the Chiefs. They're only 3-point losses. They're actually both 24-27, but those games were very close and they're against good teams. And the fact that they're almost able to bring down teams that were as good as this. But then against teams like against the Lions, they were able to actually destroy them and just close out the game in the first half. It's very impressive, even though the Falcons game was close. It's Tom Brady, right? They didn't really do well in the first half, but Tom Brady knows how to clutch up. The Bucks are just really clutch because of Tom Brady. They have all that experience. They have a really talented team, and I don't think they're going to be a first-round exit like a decent amount of people are predicting. I think they're going to make it late into the playoffs, but I don't think they're going to win. But we'll get more into that in a future episode.
Yeah. So for the top 5, I think there's a clear 5th, and then the top 4 are, in my opinion, the real Super Bowl contenders. So at number 5 is the Seattle Seahawks. The narrative of them, in my opinion, I think has completely flipped. In the beginning of the season, Russell Wilson was clearly number 1 in the MVP race, and their defense was like the worst in the league. Over the past like 3 or 4 weeks, Russell Wilson has thrown for like 8 interceptions, and he's fallen completely out of the MVP race. I think he has 13 interceptions on the year, which is crazy considering how good Russell Wilson is. And their defense has started to really pop off, and it's been looking like the middling defense it's been in previous years and in playoffs. So I think they are clearly above the rest of the teams, which I have 6 through 10, but clearly below teams I have 4 through 1. So the 4 teams in order from 4th through 1st, which I have in power rankings: number 4, the Buffalo Bills; number 3, Orleans; 2, Green Bay Packers; and number 1, the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think 1 is easy to explain, but 2 through 4, here's my explaining. The Bills, I think, are they're a really solid team, but I haven't seen Josh Allen in any playoff moments really. I don't have any faith in their run game at all, nor have I ever. And I think it really relies on their faith relies on their defense and Stephon Diggs. I'm not 100% sure if they are better than the 2 teams above them, Packers and Saints, but they could be. Next is the Saints. The Saints, I think, are the most well-rounded of these 3 teams. think they have a good quarterback, amazing quarterback, Drew Brees. They have an amazing running back, because you saw last week with Alvin Kamara. They have a nice wide receiver core. I think Michael Thomas, I don't know when he's getting back. He may be back in the playoffs, but I'm not sure. But they have, and they have an amazing defense. They're the most well-rounded, but the Packers beat them. And Aaron Rodgers is an MVP, and Devontae Adams is just one of the craziest specimens I've ever seen. So I have to have them at 2. So what are your opinions on that?
Yeah, I think my top 5 is very similar to yours. The only difference I have is I would have the Bills above the Saints. And the main reason for that is just Drew Brees. Since he's returned, he's looked horrible. Like he hasn't done anything. I know like the Saints put up like 50 something points in the most recent game, but Brees had no touchdowns, 2 picks, not that many yards. You can't rely on Kamara to get 6 touchdowns a game because that's just not going to happen. So until I see Drew Brees really perform at like the caliber that we've seen in previous years, then I can't really be that high on the Saints.
Me, I do agree with Andy to a certain extent, but I'm with Aki here. I think the Saints should be ranked above the Bills, and I agree with the rest of both of your rankings. And the reasoning is very similar. The Bills' run game is just not good. Josh Allen is probably the Bills' best running back right now, to be honest. Singletary and Zach Moss really haven't been able to get it going and become the workhorse running back that a lot of other teams have, as opposed to Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray, who are both better than all the Bills running backs, in my opinion. And the Saints are very well rounded. And Drew Brees, he did not have a pretty game. He had 0 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, but he was completing the passes. He had 300 passing yards, but they were just dumping the ball to Alvin Kamara at the 5-yard line, at the 1-yard line. Drew Brees could have had those touchdowns. So I think he's been pretty good so far this season when he's been healthy. And even if he's not able to be good, the Saints have enough support around him in terms of players, and also they have enough good backup quarterbacks to, I guess, help him. So I think the Saints are just more experienced in the playoffs and also just a slightly better team. But that doesn't go without saying that the Bills have been very good recently.
Yeah, I may be underestimating the Bills, but I think it just, I don't know. I haven't seen them in the playoffs, except for Stephon Diggs. So we'll see how that goes. One thing I'd want to mention, here's like something which I think is a bit weird, but it also, I think, makes sense. Of these 4 teams, I think the Saints are the 3rd best team, but I think they have the 4th highest chance of winning the Super Bowl. Here's what I mean by it. The Saints in the playoffs are not the Saints in the regular season. The past few years, since I started becoming interested in football, the Saints in the playoffs, they've choked leads. They haven't looked good. They've lost on some heartbreaking plays. And even though the Vikings aren't in the playoffs, I think this may continue. I think this might be an issue with Saints coaching, might be an issue with Drew Brees and Alvin Kamara, but I'm not sure. So I think that they have the 4th most chance of winning the Super Bowl amongst those teams.
All right, well, that was definitely a very interesting discussion, but that wraps it up for our segment on the power rankings. Let us know in the comment section below who you think the top 10 teams should be, and if you disagree with anything that we said. But now we have our final segment, which is Team of the Week. But actually, right before Team of the Week, I just want to remind you guys that we'll be putting a link to our playoff scenarios, since I know they can be a little bit complicated, in the description below. So if you want to check that, go ahead and that sheet. But now, for the Team of the Week, as we all know, it's just me telling you what the best players would be, and then Andy and Aki filling in on who they think should be the best player of the week, and if they disagree or agree. So as for the quarterback position, I had Tom Brady as the quarterback of the week, even though he only played 2 quarters. But this is because he had over 300 passing yards, a very high completion percentage, which was above 80%, I believe. And he had 4 touchdowns. And that's just insane for 1 half. And he was so good, and he put the Bucks ahead so much that they decided to put in Blaine Gabbert, right? Blaine Gabbert, a former first round draft pick, who actually did pretty well himself. But yeah, that's just how good Tom Brady was. And an honorable mention that I have is Josh Allen. He had a pretty similar game in terms of stat lines to Tom Brady, but he played the full game. But it's not without saying that it was against the Patriots secondary and the Patriots defensive line. They have J.C. Jackson and Stephon Gilmore and Patrick Chung. You know, all these really good players. And also Ryan Fitzpatrick, also known as Ryan Fitzmagic, who had another very good play at the end of the game because he's really clutch and just a really good quarterback who's able to secure the Dolphins a win. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like the fact that Tom Brady got like over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns in one half is ridiculous. I think it's franchise records for like a half. And if he stayed in, he could have maybe even like broke some NFL records for like passing touchdowns in a game or something like that. Um, Also, Fitzpatrick was incredible. Something interesting is that he had like half as many uh, passes completed as Tua. But he had like twice as many yards. Guess that just shows a bit of the contrast there. He's just a bit more crazy and just willing to sling it 50 yards than Tua. So yeah, great performance from him as well.
Yeah, I'd also like to shout out Aaron Rodgers. He had an amazing game. He threw for 4 touchdowns and one bonehead pick, but that was like that wasn't really significant as they blew out the Titans. I think he's been really good this season, and I think he's peaking at the right time in the season. I think Aaron Rodgers is doing amazing. One person I'd like to shout out, which you'd never think that this is possible, Brandon Allen. He only missed 8 of his 37 throws. He threw for over 370 yards, and he had 2 touchdowns. And he didn't get sacked even that much. He got sacked, I think. I don't know if he got sacked at all, which is saying something considering J.J. Watt's on that line. So I think I want to give a shout out to Brandon Allen also.
Okay, so let's move on to our next position, which is the running back position. And I actually stopped a little bit too early. I was supposed to go after running back, but it's okay. That was still an interesting discussion. So we have 2 running back spots because that's what we usually do. And the first running back spot goes to Alvin Kamara. There's no other option. There's no debate. 6 touchdowns is insane. And he also had a really good game in terms of scrimmage yards. He had over 150 yards rushing. Has to go to him. Now, our second running back is where it gets a little bit complicated. There are also a lot of other running backs who had similar stat lines to Alvin Kamara, except not 6 touchdowns, but like 20 rushes for 150 yards. But personally, I had Jeff Wilson of the San Francisco 49ers at this spot. He had something like 22 rushes for 180 yards and like 1 or 2 total touchdowns. And this wasn't one of those performances where he just had like 180-yard rush and then the rest were like 2 or 3-yard rushes. He consistently had 8 yards per carry throughout the game, which I thought was really good since he's a 4th string running back actually on the depth chart. He's listed as 4th. But yeah, he was able to be a workhorse running back, and it's just a really good game for the 49ers against a Cardinals defense, which is supposed to be good against the run, with all these really good linebackers and defensive linemen. So yeah, I had it going to Jeff Wilson, but some honorable mentions are Myles Gaskin of the Miami Dolphins and Perrine, I can't pronounce his first name, of the Bengals, and David Johnson of the Texans, who had a pretty good game rushing, even though he had a pretty good passing game last week.
Yeah, this one's just rough because there are so many good options, and it kind of feels like unfair to leave some of them out. Like Myles Gaskin had an unbelievable game. He of course had like that 59-yard touchdown, which is crucial to their win. I think in terms of like the impact that they had on their team and kind of the importance, Myles Gaskin was like more important in this week, but I think Jeff Wilson still played better. So there's a debate between those two, but I'd still give it to Jeff Wilson.
Yeah, I'd also give it to Jeff Wilson and Alvin Kamara, obviously. I think one funny personal story anecdote. I was super happy when Myles Gaskin came back. I'm like, okay, I'm going to start him, and he got 33. but fantasy points for me. But then I looked at my opponent, Andy, actually, who had Alvin Kamara. It's like, oh, he had 56. That was unfortunate, but it was still really funny.
Yeah, that was definitely interesting. Alvin Kamara getting 56.2, or I don't know what the decimal is, but something like 56 fantasy points. But unfortunately, Andy did not make the finals, but it was still a very high scoring game for him. But our next position is the wide receiver position. 2 more spots. First one is Devontae Adams. There's not really too much of a debate, although there could be. I mean, he had a very good receiving game as usual. He had 2 or 3 touchdowns, and it was a blowout win. And the second receiver spot, there is a little bit of a debate. I gave it to Stephon Diggs, who actually just played an hour ago as of the recording. He had a very good sideline touchdown, and it was against the Patriots secondary. He's the #1 wide receiver on the Bills, so he obviously picked up J.C. Jackson and Stephon Gilmore and the best Patriots coverage players. So having stats like 100 yards, over 100 yards, 9 receptions, and 2 touchdowns, and 1 really good touchdown, just impressive. But an honorable mention had to go to Mike Evans of the Buccaneers. I mean, he played very well, similar stats to Stephon Diggs, but it was against the Lions, and the Lions secondary is not good, and Jeff Okudah just hasn't been good either. He's probably injured right now or something. But yeah, still a very good performance, even though against the Lions.
Yeah, I agree here. I think Diggs and Adams have to be the top 2. But another one I'd like to give an honorable mention to is Jameson Crowder. He had 92 yards and a touchdown, which doesn't seem that good. But you also have to take note of his perfect passer rating as he launched like a 46-yard pass or something for a touchdown. I like seeing non-quarterbacks get some passing. It's like it adds some variety to the game and makes it more fun. So yeah, I'd just like to give an honorable mention to Jameson Crowder.
Yeah, I think you hit on the right people. I think it's between those 3. Evans is probably the first person I look besides them, the top 2. But I think I also want to give a shout out to the wide receiver tandem of Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb. Both of them had, I think, 2 touchdowns apiece in the game. CeeDee Lamb, he only caught 3 passes for 65 and a touchdown, but he also rushed for a 20-yard touchdown. It's always good to see those wildcat plays. As for Gallup, he was the traditional receiver. He got 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. So both of them did amazing.
Now we have some, I was going to say like lesser known, but I guess positions that don't receive as much clout, but I think they should deserve more clout. So we have the tight end spot, and we only have 1. And I gave this to Jimmy Graham. There are a lot of other tight ends that had similar stats. Like Irv Smith actually had nearly identical stats, like something like 5 receptions for 50 yards and 2 touchdowns. But I gave it to Jimmy Graham just because it was the Bears, and he does not have as good of a quarterback as some of the other teams. And I don't know, I just like the Bear game today, even though it was against the Jaguars. It was just a good game, in my opinion. And some honorable mentions are Travis Kelce, who's been known to be good like this. So even though it was a very good game that should not go unnoticed, he does this all the time. And that's Patrick Mahomes as quarterback, and also Irv Smith, who also gets touchdowns. He actually gets more touchdowns than Thielen recently and Jefferson. So I think Irv Smith's performance is also pretty regular. But Jimmy Graham's, I'm just very impressed by.
Yeah, interesting thing to note about Jimmy Graham's performance is when he got a touchdown, all the Jags fans were actually celebrating because they want Trevor Lawrence. That was pretty funny. But yeah, I also agree that it should be Jimmy Graham. I think he had almost as many yards as Kelsey and 1 more touchdown. So I think that's fair.
Nothing to say. I completely agree.
Thank you. I thought that was nice of you. But now we have our defensive positions. We don't do a D/ST defense special teams like some fantasy leagues do. We just go into some box players and some secondary players. So as for the box player, I went with Randy Gregory of the Dallas Cowboys, who's not a very well-known name, but he had a phenomenal game. He had 1.5 sacks, which by itself is really impressive. But on top of that, he had 3 forced fumbles, which is insane. That cannot go unnoticed. It has to go to him. But I don't know. There might be another good player, but I think Randy Gregory had the best game. And then for our secondary, actually no, as for some honorable mentions, Terrell Basham had 2 forced fumbles, which is pretty good too. Fred Warner of the 49ers had 1 forced fumble and 14 tackles, which is pretty good. And our next position is the secondary spot, and there are a lot of good players in the secondary positions, the corner and safety. But I give it to Akella Witherspoon partially because I'm a 49ers fan, and also because he had a very solid game. He had an interception and 7 tackles, which is already very good. So I think that the fact that he was able to put numbers like that against a team like the Cardinals, who have a very good, a notoriously good receiving core, is just impressive by itself. But I actually watched the entire game myself, and he had some really good third down stops. He had very good tackling. He tackled players right before the line, and he didn't let anyone break tackles. Like he just had a really good performance, even though he only had 7 tackles, in my opinion. And some honorable mentions are Cameron Curl of the Washington football team and Tarvarius Moore of the 49ers, who had a lot of tackles.
Yeah, on offense, not on offense, but in terms of the box, I mean, I think I pretty much agree. Another honorable mention I'd like to give though is Joe Schobert. He had a sack, a fumble, and an interception. So that's pretty interesting. It's kind of like all three stats, I guess, that are nice. But then moving on to the secondary, I would give it to Cameron Curl over Kella Witherspoon. I mean, it's pretty much like they have very similar stats. They both had an interception. Just Cameron Curl had 2 more tackles. That's why I gave it to him. But yeah, they both played pretty well.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'd go with Randy Gregory. 3 forced fumbles is something. I don't know if I've seen 3 forced fumbles before. I don't think I've seen many games where there have been 3 forced fumbles for a particular team, and that just shows how special even random names we don't even consider are. I also think that I'd have probably TJ Watt a bit higher than you guys. You guys probably had him as like, I don't know, third, fourth option, but I'd have him probably as like the second option. He had 2 sacks and a forced fumble. So I think considering the strength of Indy's O-line, it's pretty good.
All right. Yeah, that was definitely a pretty interesting discussion. But now we have hot takes where we each make some interesting predictions about what's going to happen during the playoffs this year. And I'm going to start. I'm going to start with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I think they're going to make the NFC Championship. So it all starts with this next game that they have against the Falcons. I think they beat the Falcons like the last time I think they faced 2 weeks ago. They won, even though they had that really rough start. Whereas, hopefully, I think they'll probably even get off to a better start in this upcoming game, and then finish strong. So I think they'll be able to beat the Bucks fairly easily. Not the, oh yeah, they'll beat themselves. Sorry, no, they'll beat the Falcons fairly easily, and that would put them at the 5th seed, facing the football team or the Giants or the Cowboys. They're gonna beat that team. Like, come on, they have like 4 or 5 more wins than whichever of those teams would win. And none of them really look good. Like football team has had to play Haskins recently, and the Cowboys, I guess, are all right. But like the defense still is pretty lackluster, and the Giants are just like Giants, just like eternal pain. And so I think they'll win that game. But then the real rough one, which makes this a hot take, is that I think they are going to beat the Seahawks. And this is because I just don't really I don't really like how the Seahawks have been performing recently. Like Russell Wilson at the beginning of the year, we all thought, oh wow, he's gonna surprise everyone and he's gonna beat Mahomes for the MVP. And then he just like after week 4 or 5, maybe he just started being like an average quarterback. Tyler Lockett has not been as good as he has in the past. DK Metcalf has good games, but is inconsistent. The offensive line is still terrible. Like Chris Carson's all right, I guess. The defense has improved. I'll give them that, but I don't think it's as good as like maybe even the Bucks defense, which has been pretty excellent recently, or like sometimes because they have JPP, they have an amazing like defensive line with like Vita Vea, who's coming back soon, I think. Well, I think maybe he even came back last game. I'm not sure about that. And Ndaba Su, who's had like a renaissance year, I guess. So I think that the Bucks defense is still really strong. They'll be able to effectively neutralize what has been a mediocre offense. And then on offense for the Bucks, you have Tom Brady, who we all know is, if there's one player that you need to take you to the Super Bowl, it's going to be Tom Brady. He's done it like 10 times. Um, so I think Tom Brady, with the help of Gronk, Godwin, Evans, even like Fournette, who was excellent in the last game. I just think this Bucks offense is so strong and it has so many different like so many different weapons. I think the Seahawks defense will be outmatched.
As for my hot take, I mentioned a lot of upsets throughout the video, but just to organize them into one simple take, I have a series of upsets. So the first upset is going to be between the Falcons and the Bucks. The Falcons are just really good at doing upsets. I don't know, just somehow when it doesn't matter at all, their offense and defense somehow come into rhythm and just click, right? Last year, they beat the 49ers. They almost beat the Chiefs last week, and they should have beat the Chiefs, but but it just goes to show that the Falcons are capable of performing these upsets against top teams. So the second upset is going to be between the Titans and the Texans. The Texans actually lost to the Titans in the shootout game that was 42-36. That went all the way to overtime. And even though the Texans don't have anything to play for, I don't know. It's just week 17, and these bad teams are just really good at upsetting. I can't really explain it too well, but it just happens. So the implication of a Texans win means that the Colts will take the division because they're playing the Jaguars, and there's no way that they lose to the Jaguars. And then the last upset I'm going to talk about is between the Washington football team and the Philadelphia Eagles. This isn't as much of an upset, but Eagles really don't have much to play for. But they do have a new rookie quarterback that they want to get into rhythm, and that's Jalen Hurts. And Jalen Hurts has looked pretty good the past few games, with the exception of the last game. The football team, on the other hand, has not looked so good. So if the Eagles can win, I think the Cowboys will make the playoffs because they're facing the Giants. And personally, I have the Cowboys beating the Giants. So a lot of interesting things can happen. Nothing is decided. That's why football and Week 17 is so interesting. But yeah, let's see what happens. But I have a lot of upsets, in my opinion.
One thing about the Texans game is they don't have any motivation to lose because it's not their pick. It's actually going to the Dolphins. So I think that's another factor which will be there. But yeah, I think that all these are somewhat remotely possible. So my hot take, the final hot take, is that I think amongst the playoff teams, I think that the Ravens have either the fourth or fifth highest chance of winning the Super Bowl. Here's my explanation. Lamar Jackson has been looking more like a quarterback, and he's been throwing maybe not for 300 yards, but at least for like 180 or 200 something yards instead of like 100 yards or 80 yards. We saw a couple of games like that. He was looking like Cam Newton out there. But this past few weeks, I think he got like around 200 yards last game. And obviously, the rushing attack is crazy. The defense is looking amazing again. I would know as I have the Ravens defense in fantasy. But I think that the Ravens have they can beat the Colts. They can beat the Browns. I think they can beat the Steelers. I think they can beat the Titans. The Titans is probably the closest one amongst them. I think the only teams in the AFC who I'd take over them right now are the Chiefs and the Bills. So I think the Ravens are probably the third most likely team to win the AFC. And in the NFC, I think NFC is definitely the weaker conference. I'd probably just take maybe the Packers, maybe the Saints, and like maybe 50-50 the Bucks. But yeah, that's it.
All right, yeah, that wraps it up for this episode of Hike and Spike. If you liked it, remember to like. If you didn't, let us know why in the comments below so we can change it in the future. This is the Benchwarmer signing off. See ya.